I have made no secret that Atelier Sophie 2 is one of the games I have been looking forward to the most this year. And in many cases, a sequel can be better than the original. Terminator 2, Lord of the Rings 2 Towers, Shrek 2, Lion King 2. Actually, scratch that last one. But the main question here is, does Atelier Sophie 2 benefit from the same remedy? Yeah. As the title suggests, we rejoin Sophie and Plakta on their everlasting journey in this latest Atelier adventure. However, despite this being the fourth game in the series, Sophie 2 actually occurs before Atelier Firis, following on directly from the original Sophie. And therein lied one of my biggest worries, since there was already an established mythos that surrounded the mysterious games. Sophie 2 had to be careful on what it touched on for fear of causing inconsistencies, and there was one plot element that I wanted to check up on myself, though I've yet to find my answer on that. That being said, despite being limited in what it could create, I think Atelier Sophie 2 has a good narrative in terms of what it aims to do. Now the main question I'm sure many will ask immediately, do you have to play the first game to understand this one? After my time with it, I'd say you don't. This is a standalone adventure with minor callbacks to the first game, which in of itself wasn't all that heavy in the story department anyway. There's not really a risk of getting lost here due to a lack of prior knowledge. However, I will say that the angle Atelier Sophie 2 goes for will be more impactful to those who have played the first game. Generally speaking, Atelier games are more light-hearted in nature, the stories themselves aren't thematically deep or filled with complex world building, and it's not too different for this iteration. But that's a good thing, as Sophie 2 realises the strength of its narrative is not in setting or the overarching adventure, it lies with the characters themselves, who once again are great. They're tropey, sure, but they're tropes done right. There's plenty of fluid chemistry between the group, individual story arcs that you can pursue, and a fair amount of humorous yet solid dialogue, all feeding into decent character development.
これどこにでもある鉱石だよ。ソフィーさんだって驚いてたでしょ。この形の珍しさにさ。珍しいものとはつまり希少価値があるということ。そして希少価値のあるものとはそれだけ高いものなのさ。ってことで1000コールでどうかな。たった一つしかない限定品だよ。
The land of Erdeviga is the setting, but it's very much the characters that take centre stage, and they know it too if these flashy intro sequences are anything to go by. Well, I could do that. But what makes Sophie 2's story so engaging and enjoyable, and I'll keep this brief in mind of spoilers, is that the beauty of this journey shines because of relationships between the characters, and this is one reason why I say playing the first game is going to make the events in Sophie 2 more impactful, especially in certain sequences. It still maintained that light-hearted feel which sets Atelier in general apart from many other JRPG contemporaries, but it was also quite emotional at times. The presentation and especially the Japanese voice acting were very well done. As for the voice acting, it is worth mentioning as well that Japanese is the only option available. This has remained as such since Lydian Sewell, which personally is not a problem for me, but I do realise some players do prefer a dub, so don't go in expecting one here. But yes, overall, a very solid story with some poignant moments within it. I was pleasantly surprised with what Sophie 2 had to offer on that front. But naturally, many Atelier fans will not be going into this game looking for a stellar narrative, rather it's going to be more on the gameplay side where Atelier is likely to draw you in. As is the case in pretty much every title, Alchemy remains the core of the experience, but before you can even jump into that, you have to gather materials. And Sophie 2 once again excels in this aspect. The world of Erdeviga is split into distinctive zones, and you're free to travel wherever you want within said areas, gathering materials along the way. However, world traversal and gathering became more of a focus in Sophie 2 compared to previous games. For example, there are now major gathering spots which can be harvested using the correct gathering tool, and these will yield a minigame where you will have a degree of control on what characteristics said material has. The minigames themselves aren't all that inspired, but they're fine. I also do want to give a small mention to the OST here as well, which once again is good, but I will say that the overall collection, at least for me, wasn't as strong as previous games I've played. The main battle theme in particular started off excellently and then gradually lost its luster as it changed at certain intervals. I wish there was an option to keep it as the first battle theme, which I imagine will be made an option via paid DLC. Yuck. However, the more impressive inclusion is the ability to affect the weather. Changing weather is a driving motif in Atelier Sophie 2. It not only has the potential of changing the terrain itself, meaning that previously inaccessible areas open up to the player, but it also acts as a fulcrum for puzzles. There will be many times where treasures or areas will be seemingly out of reach and they can only be accessed via the weather changing mechanic. And since you don't get all of the options at once, it means that there's a real incentive to continually come back to areas as you unlock more. Changing the weather will shift the list of potential materials you can obtain and also change up the enemies you can encounter at a given time, meaning that there's always the potential to find something fresh. Now, it might seem intimidating as there's a lot of chopping and changing occurring due to the weather mechanic, but really, it's not like that at all. The quality of life on offer from Sophie 2 is brilliant. It'll give you a full rundown of all the enemies within an area, at least the ones you've discovered, and the materials as well, splitting them based on the weather chosen. It makes it easy to not only see what materials you may have missed, but also find these specific items for requests or the main story, which are always marked out for you. It will also split out materials based on their gathering level, indicated by the number of stars below the icon. For example, if you see a question mark for a level 3 fishing material, you know you will need to improve your proficiency in fishing to obtain it, either by unlocking a bonus skill that comes from progression, or by creating a more effective fishing rod. Overall, it is a really solid system with some neat innovation to spice up the standard formula. And that praise also extends to the combat. Bonk an enemy on the map and you seamlessly shift to battle. Unlike Atelier Riser, which utilised a more real-time approach, Sophie 2 reverts to the turn-based style of the original Mysterious Trilogy. You have 3 members on the front line and 3 members on the back line, but in actual fact it feels more like you're controlling 6 characters at once, and that's mostly down to the link attacks. If you build up this gauge on the bottom left, you'll be able to link your abilities with another member, and in addition, it will also swap them. This works really well, as it ensures switching the party in and out becomes a part of the experience itself, which is important as each of them fits a specific role for the most part. Some will be the damage sponge, some will buff, some will debuff, others focus on magic attacks, and so on. They're not rigid roles by any stretch, but there's a clear indication of what each character specialises in at the very least. And that's intuitive when considering the other main addition in Sophie 2, that being enemy auras. Late game foes and especially bosses will utilise specific auras to protect themselves, and these will significantly reduce the damage they take in most cases unless you break it first. Auras are mainly broken by focusing on their weaknesses, which can easily be checked before attacking, and once you do, they'll be stunned for a period of time where you can rain down the pain. The importance of breaking auras is a cornerstone of combat in Atelier Sophie 2, and it means that diversity in your team and your preparation in terms of what items you bring to battle will determine how successful you are. It's once again a system that is tied intrinsically to alchemy. The more alchemy you do and the more you experiment with it, the more rewarding the combat becomes. There's a visual payoff for the preparation you put in beforehand, both in terms of items you bring and the equipment you use. So again, there is a real incentive to take your time with Atelier Sophie 2 and attempt to find as much as you can during your travels, as this is your main method of unlocking new recipes, which you can then take back to the atelier to craft via alchemy. And the alchemy itself? Yeah, it's excellent. Anyone who has played one of the original Mysterious games will feel a sense of familiarity. The grid-based style once again returns, and it splits into 4 key areas: choosing the recipe to create, deciding on materials, laying them on the grid, and finally picking the traits on completion. One thing I do have to praise Sophie 2 for immediately is how it alleviated one of my personal biggest problems in the last 3 titles. I'm partially colourblind, and it was difficult for me to work with the alchemy mechanic, especially in the original Sophie, so much so that I had to use a third-party application to try and sort the problem. Sophie 2 remedies the situation by adding the symbol of the element next to each component, so no longer is it a case of matching colours, it's simply a case of matching the symbols, which was so much better for me. In terms of its meat and bones though, placing an item on the grid will contribute to an item's effect level, which are split via elements. For example, a 3 square lightning component will contribute to 3 blips on all corresponding lightning effects. Place it on a lightning symbol within the grid and that yields 1 extra blip. Pretty simple and not too dissimilar to Lydian Sewell in that regard. However, the main draw of Atelier Sophie 2's alchemy is derived from element links. Certain components will have stars instead of the standard square, and these stars represent links. If you place the stars next to each other on the grid, they will connect and also increase the max effect level, meaning that this is the only way to attain the higher level characteristics that are normally barred off. And this core mechanic is expanded upon with the help of the other characters. As you progress through their individual arcs, new abilities will open up specific to each member of the team, and these give you the ability to change components to their given element, create new links, or even bring in completely new components during a synthesis. This means that you can max out, say, a lightning denominated effect, and then attempt to do the same for a fire effect. Combine this with the return of catalysts that can also be remade for beneficial characteristics, and you once again have an intuitive and deep system which is oh so satisfying to work with. However, despite my praise of it, I also have to admit that the alchemy system, or at least the pacing of its progression, is the biggest weakness of Sophie 2 in my eyes. Because character arcs are the driving force for the options you eventually receive, it means you have to progress the story quite a bit to get everything opened up to you. It took about 20 hours before I even had the catalyst, meaning I was working with the standard grid for nearly half of my playtime. Now that might be down to mine choosing to explore and fill out my recipe book rather than progress the main story, so it could be faster if I chose a different route of progression, but it did feel slower than previous games in introducing its concepts, especially ones that were quite important. Saying that though, there is no denying that when it is firing on all cylinders, it's an absolute joy to experiment with. Combine this with the quality of life elements like autosynthesis for the less important items and duplication so that you can dedicate most of your time to the items you want to pursue, and this system ends up tied as my favourite of the games I've played so far, along with Lydian Sewell's, and I've no doubt that many Atelier fans will have a blast with it. Atelier Sophie 2, even at this early stage, is without a doubt one of my games of the year, and will likely stay that way when I round up the best JRPGs I've played in 2022. There are a few pacing issues here and there, mostly tied to the options within Alchemy, and some of the additions like the major gathering spots are uninspired, but Sophie 2 excels in many areas that you would expect from this franchise, and more. The new additions like weather control are a welcome fresh take in terms of how you traverse the world, but the core of the series remains. Solid alchemy fundamentals form the basis, and it's surrounded by a light-hearted adventure for the most part with some surprisingly emotional moments, all tied together in a neat little package by a lovable cast of characters. Needless to say, this latest adventure of Sophie and Plachta is once again a synthesis of the highest quality.